every single day, take a little bit of time to talk about the things that are in this review package. Today I thought we'd focus on some actual questions that you could think about. So I'm reminding you that the review sheet has the full list of topics, and then there are practice problems for anything where it's a skill that you need to be able to practice. So for the first question, it asks you about classifying matter. And so it's asking you to think about what's the difference between elements and compounds, solutions, and mixtures. So the key to this one is, can you classify matter? And so you would have to go back to like the first day of Science 10 to think about how we classify matter. But something like question number 1 is something I would ask you to do. Classify this substance. Tell me what it is. Since we were focusing on elements and compounds, which are both pure substances, that would generally be the focus of my questions. Now, number 2 involves a little bit of interpreting. It's asking you, for each of these things, which scientist goes with which model. Oh, that was nice. And so you have to be able to interpret information given a description and be able to identify which model that goes with. You might want to think about a visual here. I'm a big fan of using pictures if I can instead of words to associate things with models. But we would have talked about several different models of the atom. You should be able to identify which model we're talking about if we give you a description of what it says. So that's what number 2 is talking about. Number 3 is asking you to classify substances. And so this would require that you know the characteristics of acids, bases, and neutral substances. So for example, an acid has a pH less than 7. Acids are sour. Acids are always aqueous. Acids react with metals. And acids turn blue, litmus, red. Now we know that bases are basically the opposite of acids in a lot of those characteristics, so I'm not going to rewrite that whole list. But that's how you would go about classifying things in each of these examples. The next question asks you to classify substances as soluble or insoluble. So you need your solubility table, which is part of your data booklet. Now, if you happen to have lost your data booklet, I will make a new post on Google Classroom that shows up at the top that has that data booklet in there so that you could print out a new one if you need to. For today's purposes, I have lots of booklets that people could borrow. Yes, so in the exam booklet, everything that's in your data booklet is in the exam booklet. Literally, I took those pages from the exam booklet and just gave you the beginning of it. So that you remember, in your solubility table, there are 3 rows. The top row has ions. Usually it's the negative ion, so the anion, that you find up on the top row. Then there are 2 other rows that have other ions, usually cations, the positive ones, and you're matching things up. You're finding both parts of the compound and asking yourself, where do they line up on this chart? So usually your negative ones are up here. If the match happens in the middle row, it's soluble. If the match happens in the bottom row, it's insoluble. For things that are soluble, you would say that they are aqueous, and for things that are insoluble, you would say solid. Another good word for something that goes in this category is a precipitate. That's a solid substance that gets made during a reaction. So you have a few examples there where you could look up on your solubility table whether or not they're soluble. And then the last one I wanted to look at was number 5. Could you classify things as being ionic or molecular just from their name or just from their formula? Remember that ionic compounds are made up of metals and nonmetals, or they're made up of a polyatomic ion and a nonmetal, a metal and a polyatomic ion, or 2 polyatomic ions. So you're looking for a metal or a polyatomic ion. If you see one of those things, it's definitely ionic. Molecular compounds are only made up of nonmetals. And so I'd like you to look at those first 5 questions. You can talk to each other. You can ask me for help. If anyone needs a data booklet, tell me, and I will dig some out for people.